One of the first things that companies or sales trainers or managers kind of teach us is to ask questions. And if you've been around for a while, you know for sure that one of the best books on questions has been written by Deb Calvert. The name of the book is Discover Questions and kind of shaped the way we actually frame questions in the sales profession. And I'm happy to have Deb here to ask her a lot of questions. So happy to have you on the show, Deb.
Oh, Tabia, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you indeed. So I know that for sure most of the audience members are pretty familiar with you and with this book. But if you want to tell us something more about you, what you're doing, what you have done for the sales and business community, but also how your consulting practice evolved in the last years.
Okay. Well, it's interesting. A lot of people don't realize that they have bumped into me someplace else. So I'll talk about some of that. I founded something called the Sales Experts Channel, which for about 8 years had global sales experts coming on and presenting over on the Bright Talk platform. And it was something that really had a lot of traction, hundreds of thousands of viewers over those years. I've written 3 books, and I know we'll talk more about those here today. Been on lots of those lists and contributed articles to many, many sales sites and podcasts and the like. I hope primarily that people know that I'm a buyer side researcher. I think that's what is unique about my work is that I certainly respect and access the research others have done inside sales organizations from the seller side. But I also wanted to get buyer perspectives into the mix. So I founded my business, People First Productivity Solutions, 20 years ago. We've had our 20-year anniversary recently. And at first in business, coming out of a Fortune 500 where I had been overseeing the sales function in 41 markets, I first focused dually on sales and leadership, and sometimes felt like I would go between my days in two very different kinds of streams until I realized, you know, the best sellers are also leaders. And then there became this evolution in my consulting practice and in the work that I did that was focused more on leadership, whether it was sales or some other function in the organization. But in sales, I started researching that idea. So the evolution has been a choice. And I guess I spend more time these days in leadership than I do in sales, but I'll never stop focusing on sales in some fashion because I love it.
And thanks for the answer. And I think that you've been pretty forward looking for your entire career. You know, you started talking to salespeople while researching on buyers, and now everyone seems interested in getting the buyer's perspective. And the same thing with leadership. Now everyone is talking about how to frame a conversation, how to lead the conversation in not a pushy way. So this is also one of the reasons why I'm happy to have you here. But let's start from the book that helped me understand, like get to know you and your practice, Discover, the book I was talking about at the beginning, because 2023 was the 10th year or anniversary of your book. So the first edition was published in 2013. I think I read it in 2017, 2018, like straight out of university, okay? My sales degree in my hands, and then I start getting insights on the outside. And you got a lot of recognition. HubSpot recognized the book as one of the 20 most highly rated sales books of all time. But my question for you is, let's consider when the book came out, 2013. What do you think was the reason of the success of the book?
I really think it's 4 things. And I have heard this so many times from other people. The first is that it is the basics of questions. I really broke it down into the fundamentals, all evidence-based, research-based, but didn't assume that people understood those fundamentals. Of course, we ask questions naturally without thinking about it, But if we step back and think about why and how, those really basics, then it's illuminating. So I think that was one piece of it. I think the fact that I wrote it with a non academic tone, even though it was all based on research, it made it approachable. It made it something that people could truly understand and use without having to be bored as they read it. Um, Part of the non academic tone, I think the third thing that made it successful was that I included real examples from sellers, from observations in the field, and from many different industries. So it became relatable for people, whether it was B2B or B2C. I tried to incorporate all of that. And then the other is what we mentioned a moment ago. It had buyer side research. And in 2013, there were not many, certainly not widespread utilizations of buyer side research. And that was interesting. It was surprising in many instances for people to understand how buyers were reacting. So it was unique in that fashion.
And in 2023, the new version came out. I bought it. I haven't started reading it, I gotta be honest. But what does it add more? Because I've seen that it's really changes a lot of the structure of the book. Like, let's say that the skeleton is the same, but then you focus even more, as much as I got like reading a few pages, on the importance and the weight that you have to give questions, because we are strict on time. We don't have the time we had in 2013 to ask questions. So what's new in the 2023 edition of the book?
I probably, if I could go back to when I published the book, I probably wouldn't even call it the 10th anniversary edition because they are very different books. What's the same is the Discover model. That's 8 purposes of asking questions, Discover being an acronym for the 8 purposes. But it's a wholly different book within that same framework. The 2023 book extends outside of selling and talks about questions that you can use in any professional or personal conversation that you might have. It also has expanded research. Since 2013, there has been a lot more research into questions than was readily available in 2013. So I've always kept up on that, and I took out the pieces that I found most interesting. Again, tried to keep a non-academic tone, even though I was accessing a lot of academic research. Turns out, I think this is interesting to me, there are over 100 documented benefits of asking better questions. Most people have no idea, right, that it can make that much difference. So I wanted to incorporate many of those benefits and help people see how to achieve those benefits, no matter who they were talking to or what kind of conversation it was.
So it's like, let's say that in this new book, questions become like the focus for everything, not only for the sales profession, but also if you're a buyer, if you're a marketing, if you are outside, I don't know, talking to your friends and so on. So it's, you basically elevated the practice of asking questions in this edition.
That's the aim. And in the first book, I also focused on using questions to get connections between buyers and sellers. So it was discover questions, get you connected. The new book is, because of all the new research that I'd found, it is discover questions for connections, clarity, and control. So there's an emphasis on how to use questions quickly, efficiently, with our limited time, to get clarity that keeps us from making mistakes and gets us in the right direction, but also to reclaim some control post-pandemic and in this world of information overload. I think it's easy to feel like you're spinning out of control, but questions are a great tool to get you back on track.
So redirect the conversation through questions. I think that, no, but that's a really good point, because I think that, and we will get like later on also on this topic, I think that questions are still the essence of selling, but now we have only a few chances to ask wrong questions. This is what I think changed. And based on the questions we ask, like the judgment of the buyers or even of the people listening to us, let's say that I'm a sales leader or a leader in general, I got really evaluated on the questions I ask, way more than before. So yeah, I don't know if you agree with that, but yeah, tell me more.
Research agrees with that. It doesn't even have to be me. Research with buyers tells us that buyers are much more finicky. They're more particular about which sellers they will spend time with and which ones they won't. And one of the clues that a buyer first considers is, how interested in this salesperson about me personally, not just generically. Powerful questions signal interest. Of course, they need to be accompanied with good listening skills, but powerful questions do connect people and do intrigue people, including buyers, right? Your question is interesting to them. Now suddenly they're interested in you and they will spend more time with you.
So the human being is still is even more the center of everything. I think the more we go, yeah, the more we go out with because what I think is that everything that is technical, feature, benefits, and so on is out there. The great zone is not out there, and the great zone is the people. So
Yes. Yes. Would you like to hear? You'd be the first person I've ever told this to professionally. Would you like to hear my latest research of
go
one?
for it. Go for
I'm
it.
going to figure out a way to expand this research. I have a grandson, and he is 15 months old. He's just very, very young. But the past couple of weekends, as he's visited me, I've asked him some questions, open ended questions that he couldn't possibly understand. Questions like, I'll say to him, Benson, what do you think of these new tariffs that are being imposed around the world? He's 15 months old. He has no idea what I'm talking about. But when I phrase a question like that with an open ended tone and an interest, and I look at him, he gives me a very long answer. I can make no sense of his answer, but he acts like it's a real conversation. And when I ask him a closed-ended question like, do you think we should stop the tariffs? He says one word answers. He says either yeah, yeah, or no, no, no. So other brain science told us, right, that there's something between open and closed ended, but I had no idea that it would start that young to engage the person that you're talking to. And so I'm going out looking for more babies to see if this works, because it would tell us that there's something hardwired inside our brain that causes us to respond differently.
I think it's, and thank you for sharing that. I think it's also interesting for, you know, parenting, for the parenting world. Like, how do you teach your, or let's say, how you educate your son or your daughter? Because I think that the more, if these research lands, I think that it changes a lot of things. Like, the more you educate them in looking for open-ended questions, the more you kind of trigger a dialogue, and the more you develop conversational skills, which will
Yes.
be probably sent. No, that's a really good one. So I would be happy to have you on the show again when the research is
Once I
out
figure
there.
it out.
No, no, but anyway, and thank you for that. Let's jump quickly to another topic. I think it's important because I told you you have these historical books, but your favorite book, my favorite book of Deb Calvert, is another one. So my favorite book is Stop Selling and Start Leading, and again, 2018, buyer confusion before pandemic. You, James Cozes, but also Barry Posner, so the co-authors, you anticipated everything that was related to control and controlling a conversation. So you kind of anticipated the confusion that would have happened after the COVID, after the pandemic. Again, a lot of achievements, one of the best books on 2018. So yeah, if you want to just share a few words before I start asking you a few questions.
Sure. Let me start by saying something about my co-authors for those who might not know their names. Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner are pioneers in the field of leadership. They've written over 40 books. Their body of work is known as the Leadership Challenge, so many people will connect to it that way. And what's very unique about their work is that it's all behavioral. They have identified 30 specific behaviors that make leaders more effective, make it more likely that people will willingly choose to follow them. And I had worked with them. I'm what's known as a certified master of the Leadership Challenge. I had worked with them through the Leadership Challenge and had done some research in leadership. And it occurred to me one day that those very same 30 behaviors seemed to be what the very best salespeople that I would shadow and work with were also doing. So I proposed this to Jim and Barry, and they said, well, let's do a research project. And we did through the University of Santa Clara. And at Santa Clara University, we commissioned a study, pretty extensive panel study with buyers. And we asked them to react to those 30 behaviors. Did they see sellers doing them? Would they like to see sellers doing them more frequently? What if sellers did them more frequently? And of course, open response questions as well. And it was fascinating because what we learned out of that panel study initially with 530 B2B buyers, every single one of them wanted to see all 30 behaviors more often. And for each of those 30 behaviors, they said, I would definitely meet more often and more willingly with a seller who demonstrated this behavior more frequently. So this was a little unusual because in research, you don't usually get unanimous, all 530 people saying they wanted this. And so we went ahead and explored this a little more. Then we did some seller side research to see the impact when sellers would increase the frequency of these behaviors. And it makes sellers who do this show up as leaders who engage their buyers and make it easier for their buyers to understand. And it's so, what I love about this is that it's now easy. No seller has to go get a personality transplant to have charisma or some other salesy kind of persona. All they need to do is choose simple behaviors more often. So behaviorally, right, a blueprint that sellers can follow that's pleasing to buyers and causes buyers to meet more often and buy more often.
That's a really good point. And no, thank you for for the introduction of the book, of the study, the research, because only by understanding what's behind, we can really get the content of it. I think that what's really important, or let's say what I got the most out of the book and how it shaped my way of selling, was when you start talking about a thought sales leader. So that was for me something unusual, simply because for me, like, selling was discovery, identify the need, map something against what's needed. And then in 2018, competition was fierce, like as it is today. So how do you emerge? How do you get out of the, because if everyone has what they need, like that's pretty much done. How do you sell something where the need is latent? How do you move a conversation to show a value that probably is considered by the buyer, but is not a priority? And this is where the thought sales leader, like, really helped me. So if you want to say a few words on this thought leader, even if like going deep into the 30 criteria, you're more than welcome.
Okay, so let's face it, in most industries, there is extreme competition. For simplicity's sake, we'll say that there is your organization and two others that sell essentially the same product with basically the same options and pretty similar prices. Quality's about the same. You don't have great distinctions between products because everyone is constantly iterating and innovating to keep up with each other. So the difference that a buyer is going to respond to and notice is going to be emotional rather than practical. The practical elements are all the same. Well, emotion doesn't come from a product. Companies wish it would come from a brand, but we've lost most of that distinction too. Well, now it's up to the seller. If I am to somehow be the seller who earns your business, all I've got to stand out is me and how I connect with you. So this becomes a mindset. My thoughts not just make the sale, not just recite the product features, not just hope I call you more often so that you get forced into coming my direction, but emotionally. If I have a mindset, my thoughts are, I intend to help you. I want to know you. I want to make things easy for you. If I enter into it with those kinds of thoughts, it will show up in my behaviors and it will engage a buyer. Because before we were buyers and sellers, we were human to human. Let's connect at that level using these behaviors, which will help you to do that, and making sure you've got the mindset that drives those behaviors.
So let's say that I want to hire someone tomorrow, okay? I take your word for, as an advice, and I want to really hire someone who has these characteristics. How should I assess this?
I am a big proponent of behavioral interviewing. I work in HR also often enough that I'm very, familiar with behavioral interviewing, but I think it's especially important in selling. So if I were interviewing salespeople, I'd be asking questions to assess whether or not a seller demonstrates key behaviors, not just so much characteristics. When we say, sell me this pen in an interview, we're looking at characteristics. How enthusiastic is the seller? How much do they look at your needs versus their own needs? But that's just a starting point. There's more deeper that we could be going for. I'd be looking for your past behaviors because past behaviors are the best indicator of future behaviors. I'd be asking you to tell me stories. Behavioral interviewing has three parts. Tell me the situation, tell me your behaviors, tell me the results. So I'd be asking a seller a question like, first the situation, something like, tell me about a time when your buyer had to enlist internal support in their own organization to get your proposal accepted. Well, now I'm going to hear, has a seller ever been in that situation? And they can recap it for me. And so then I ask a behavior question. What specifically did you do to encourage this buyer as they were working internally? This is it actually represents a few of the behaviors that we found in the Stop Selling and Start Leading research. And then I'm going to conclude with the results question like, well, how did this play out in the long term? I want to make sure that you, the candidate, can see the connections between your behaviors, the impact on the buyer, the buyer's perseverance in their own organization. If you've done it, I have a better confidence that you can do it again.
Is it possible that, and thanks for the answer, but is it possible that salespeople learn to fake these answers?
It's much harder to fake a behavioral interview than it is the standard interview. You can tell when somebody says, well, oh no, what did you do? And you can tell when somebody says, I'd probably, oh, okay, what would you actually do? What have you done? And I like behavioral interviewing for that reason. We get to the true heart of it. Behavioral interview questions are based on competencies. What do you want to see from a seller? And some of those certainly are going to be the same one company to a next. But if you're going to behaviors like the ones identified in the book, or if you're going to company values that you want to see represented, it's a lot less likely that a seller can anticipate and prepare to fake those.
I have another question related into let's merge the two books, okay? So let's merge the topics of Discover and Stop Selling and Start Leading. So, and let's start from the behavior. So what I see every day. So I see that, buyers are spending a lot less time with us, okay? There are a lot of research out there. Gartner says 17% of buyers' time is spent with sellers. Sixth Sense says that 70% of buyer time is spent doing research on their own and so on. So what's real is that we always has less time to make an impact, to have an impact in our conversation. So we have less time to build trust. And if we don't build trust, we have always less confidence in leading someone to results. And this goes back to, the previous question. So to become thought leaders, if you were a seller now, today, what kind of actions would you focus on to really be impactful in the 17% of time? So to collect the right information, establish trust, and then guide the buyer.
Well, we have to admit, you've suggested it here, but I'm going to call it out more specifically. Sadly, time with sellers is low value, and that's why buyers avoid it. So, whatever behaviors we're choosing, we need to make sure that the time spent with sellers is perceived as higher value. Being a leader makes time with you higher value because leaders stimulate new ideas and they genuinely engage other people, not generically, not about the product, by about right where you are, the issues that you're experiencing in a hyper personalized way. We are in something called the experience economy from the research of Pine and Gilchrist. We are deeply in the experience economy. We're moving toward the transformation economy. So buyers, they want to do what's known as participating in creating what they want. Right? That's the hallmark of an experience economy. They don't want to hear about your recitation of product features. They want to participate in creating what they want. That's a whole different kind of a dialogue. So to answer your question, what would I do to make sure I get the most out of this smaller amount of time that I have, but also to try to get more time? I would ask very high quality questions that cause you to show up as a leader and earn you more time with the buyer because they're truly involved in the conversation and you're making them think about things they haven't thought about, and it feels important to them, that time spent.
So it's really like starting another type of conversation, as you said. And let's go indeed into the discover, like the acronym, the framework. Okay, which kind of pieces do you think we can apply today? All of them at different levels of the sales project. Like, what is your thought on this? Because someone can, I don't know, take your book and then go out and start asking questions to just flag the checklist, which is the reason why we are failing pretty much all the application of the methodologies out there. Like, we are failing MEDDIC because we think that we have to start with the MEDDIC checklist at the beginning and so on. What advice would you give someone on how to apply your framework nowadays?
I'm really glad you said what you said because I do think we have misunderstood what a sales process should be. We are doing checklists. Here's your list of questions. Ask these 5 questions if you're a BDR, and then pass this on to someone else so they have the information. We've made the sales process internally focused to meet our needs as opposed to trying to get the outcome of advancing the sale and bringing in a buyer. So let me take a small tangent and then I'll come back to answer your question. You mentioned Gartner a moment ago. Their research is so high value, but there is more recent research over the past couple of years that they've been focusing on around sense making. Sense making and leadership go hand in hand. Leaders are sense makers. They make it less complex. They make it easier. They take away that feeling of being overwhelmed, which buyers so often experience. It's a big cause of the pauses that they put on a sales decision at all. So discover the framework, 8 different purposes for asking questions. Instead of using a checklist of questions, being thoughtful. What do I need to know? Where are we with this buyer? What would help this buyer? Then you can think about the purpose. Now, if I had to very narrowly answer, where would I focus? I would start making sure that you have a very good understanding of the V question. V in Discover, the acronym stands for value. I think it's an extremely good differentiation. It's one of those questions that makes a buyer think, makes a buyer trust you, helps them to see value and time spent with you. So it won't fit every scenario, but it fits a lot of them. A value question is anything you ask to get clarity or to cause the buyer to get their own clarity about what's most urgent, what's most important. Now we strip out a lot of the pieces that are confusing or overwhelming. They say to you, I need to accomplish X and Y and Z. Most sellers would say, ooh, Z, I've got a solution for that. Here you go. But if you pause and ask a value question first, oh, out of X and Y and Z, which one matters most to you and why? Oh, X is most important. Okay, I'm glad I didn't start with Z. Now I need to focus where the buyer is. And what buyers say when asked value questions, they say, that was really helpful to me. I was able to focus. I was able to know my own priorities and pay attention to something smaller versus feeling overwhelmed by everything.
That's a really good answer, and thank you for that. Last question related to this merge of of topics. When would you start leading or guiding the conversation? Like since the beginning, or like how does it work? Because for me, for example, I know when I have to guide it, but I cannot define it. If you give me a checklist, I know it's my gut, and most of the time I'm right, but I don't know how to kind of make it quantitative. You know what I mean? It's so. What will you do? How will you approach this situation when it's time to drop the questions, start guiding, and maybe come back to the questions?
Okay, I have to tell you a small story first and then come back to this one as well. But the story is relevant. Um, I go to a lot of networking events. And during the pause with COVID, when we weren't out in person doing networking events, I started, sort of reflecting on events that I'd been to because I'd noticed something. I don't do a lot of talking at those events. When I'm meeting people and going person to person at a networking event or at a conference, I typically just ask questions. I'm a curious person. I like to get to know people. And it sort of fascinated me how often I would have a conversation, perhaps a sort of one-sided conversation where I'm asking a lot of questions and learning about you. I wouldn't say much, but people would walk away from that having just met me, and they would often say, wow, Deb, she is so smart. And I would think, why do you think that? Based on what? And I realized that when you ask quality questions and when you engage people, they form perceptions about you. Okay, now, all of that to say, asking questions and leading and selling, they shouldn't be three discrete, separate steps. They're all the same. To be a good seller, you're going to show up as a leader. And leaders, the very best leaders, they do ask a lot of questions that engage people, that cause people to feel like they're a part of something, that get them excited and ennobled about whatever's going to come next. So when do you make this shift from, say, questions to leadership? Well, that question comes out of a sales process, discovery, proposal. What if they're all the same? As we're doing discovery and the buyer's giving you ideas, they're sort of participating in creating what they want. They're sort of framing up their own proposal. You're leading as you're asking the questions. The questions are the underpinning of the sales process, but they aren't exclusive to one part of the sales process. They're the natural bridge between the sales process.
Do you think, I mean, you consult a lot of tech companies, okay, which probably are the more structured internally. Like they were the land of freedom. Now they became like a prison for everyone because we have all these criteria and controls, and it seems that most of the activities we do are done to justify how we spend our time. Do you think, or like, what is your impression on the systems frameworks that we use? Because I think, based on what I've seen in my consultancy practice, but also in my job, is that we are using a lot of frameworks that are basically not helping us to succeed, which are failing us. I don't know if you've seen this lack of human to human skill in a sector that has to be human centric like tech?
Well, I won't narrow it down that way. I very much appreciate what you're saying, and I certainly have seen it in tech. But because so much of the research is done in tech and the books are written about that research done in tech, there's lots of imitators and emulators in all other sectors. Here's what happens. A consultant or a researcher comes into an organization and assesses what they're doing and says, oh, your salespeople, they're not doing enough of the proposal writing. Here's what they need to improve. Instead of changing things, instead of changing the approach or catching up with what buyers want, more often it's do more of the same or do better with the same. We're very attached to that sameness, the sales process, the scripted questions, the things that used to work, and nobody's admitting maybe they just don't work anymore. And then you get an outlier. You get someone in a sales organization who doesn't comply. They have deeper conversations. Their sales calls take longer, and people start to mark them down for you're not meeting your quota of calls, the number of calls today. Okay, yeah, but I'm closing more. I'm booking more appointments, and we forget about these outcomes. We focus on this process instead. So I agree with you, and I think there's room for experimentation at a minimum to see what's going on here, that deeper conversations equal better results.
Thank you for this answer, Deb. I think that we are almost like at the end of the conversation, but I want to know, what are the projects are you working on now? What are you working on? Maybe another book, maybe the research about the kids and so on. Everything you have, just share it with us. It will make also easier for us, to follow you.
Well, I guess I'll always be writing a book and doing research. I'm not ready to release a book at this point. I have lots of bits and pieces of the next book. It will be for coaches, sales coaches, other coaches, but also I think sellers ought to be coaches to their buyers. So there'll be an element of that in it too. What I've been working on is People First Leadership Academy. It is the site that is providing soft skills training, leadership development. We have over 100 courses there in a wide variety of formats. So little snack size lessons that are pre-recorded, interactive classes, immersion courses. One of the ones I want to be sure your audience knows about is the 3-part, 3 meetings, interactive masterclass on questions, where we do some really deep dives. I've added a case study. We have opportunities it's a small enough group for some one-to-one coaching and some small group development of ideas. That's coming up in June, but we do that 2 or 3 times a year. So People First Leadership Academy, look for Deb's masterclass on questions, and it's one that I think a lot of folks who've heard this interview might very much enjoy.
Thank you. Last thing, Deb, if there is one thing you want to tell the audience or to all the salespeople who will feel kind of, down because we're not closing that much, what's going on. So any type of advice you will give us in this weird and confused time?
Yeah. I would say if you're experiencing a lull in sales or something that's not working, especially if you're thinking, maybe this isn't for me, that's usually a red flag that tells me you're not bringing you to your sales calls. You're relying on the way somebody else does it or said to do it. You're making it performative and inauthentic. And people respond to people. They don't respond to fake. They don't respond to method and process. So liberate yourself. Think of yourself as a leader. Think of yourself as a person having a conversation with another person and how you might be able to help them. And it just might change how you feel about the work you're doing. And that will certainly change the results that you're getting.
Thank you so much, Deb. I hope that you had a nice time, a fun time.
Thank you.
But I think that the whole conversation was really good, like a learning moment both for me and my audience. So thank you for that. And as I said, I really hope you had fun.
I had a great time, and I'd love to come back and tell you about research with babies. I just have to figure out how to do that study.
Absolutely, do it, and we will advertise it like research for future salespeople. Just to keep it in the. Thank you again, Deb.
Thank you, Tobias.